Well, today it's my privilege to talk to Jackie Robertson, registered psychotherapist and a longtime friend of mine. I've learned so much from you, Jackie. Thank you for being on the show today.
You're welcome.
Jackie, it's a crazy time with COVID and families, and you spend a lot of time with families. And I love how just you're a straight shooter. So I want you to give it to us straight when I ask you about the school year coming up. And parents are and families are making decisions about whether to send kids back to school or keep them at home. And those kind of decisions cause a lot of stress. I'm sure you've seen. Can you have any advice for us about sending kids back to school? And no matter our choice, what advice do you have for parents regarding how to navigate these kinds of decisions?
I guess, I think we need to remember about COVID, um, you know, the realities of it and how frightening it can be and how, it is a pandemic. And that in the last 6 months, there's been a lot of worries and fears. And at this present time, obviously, the hot topic is school, right? And I think the big important thing is for families to make educated decisions, and stick a little bit to the facts, which I realize the landscape is changing too, because the experts are telling us different things sometimes at different times because they're learning too, is make those decisions based on some of the facts of, where is your family in terms of, the vulnerability of your family, the location where you are. And it's a very personal and private decision, and I think people need to be respectful of each family's decision to make it, right? There is no easy answers to it. I think any decisions you make will have ripple effects from it, right? So being very educated and gathering your facts and discussing with obviously your partner, if you have one, both sets of parents, and wise people, seeking counsel from wise people that are around you, and then coming to the table and wrestling through it, right? There's no cookie cutter to it. So I guess was what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think you've seen to the extremes that we all have, where it's almost like one camp versus another camp. So I appreciate like saying, let's get informed based on your family's needs. Perhaps would you say that's probably the best strategy? Because for some parents are working outside of the home, for some they're at home. So all of those factors we need to take into account. Correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And each family is very unique, right? And different families have different support systems, different dynamics, different variables, right? And I think I've said the word. You've addressed a really good point, Lori, where COVID can be on a spectrum from 1 to 10, right? And that it's a very heated discussion, and in my work since March. Definitely, I've seen people have very, very strong views about it, and it's created a lot of disruptions and tensions in relationships, right? And I think we need to focus on being respectful of people's decision, right? And not making people feel blaming them or guilting them or shaming them, right? You
Right.
need to make a decision based on your family. The other thing too is there is no crystal ball, quote unquote, kind of thing. You make a decision. It doesn't mean that that decision is unchangeable, right? It's like I said, it's a shifting landscape. Things are changing all the time, with the scientists, with the experts, and with our own family kind of thing. So once you make a decision, it doesn't mean that you can't change your decision either. If variables
That's good.
change.
I think that's very good, Jackie. I think people should start out in a direction and then keep assessing as they go. Now, let me ask you this. You know, what should kids know about COVID? Like, depending maybe on their age, but sometimes I feel like kids know way too much about COVID. So, what advice do you give families in regards to how much to tell your kids about this pandemic?
That's a great question because definitely since March, what I'm noticing and what worries me and at times distresses me, which is probably not the best thing for a psychotherapist to say, um, is the amount of information that is funneling down to children, especially young children, right? Um, there's nothing quote normal about COVID, right? Physical distancing or social distancing is not a normal thing. That's not how we're created. We're created for relationships and connection, right? So when we tell people you can't be close to each other, you can't really, in March for sure, can't talk to each other, you can't touch each other, it creates a lot of distress. right? So nothing about it is normal. The other part about COVID is there is no end date, right? I think a lot of us realize this can go on, question mark, right?
Yeah.
So being very aware that, we want to create some normalcy, right? As much as we possibly can, especially for young children. Right. I get a little distressed when little kids are explaining to me what COVID is and whose bubble is who and all that stuff. It's not that they don't need to know it, but it needs to be age appropriate. Children do not have the cognitive capacity, and depending on temperaments of children and how much you filter through, it can be very distressing for certain children, which is not healthy for them for their mental health.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Jackie. And I think age appropriate's the key there. As you know, I was a teacher for many years, and sometimes I thought, like kids were carrying unnecessary burdens. So, what I hear you saying, and I know you well, it's like parents be the parent. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely, right? You're the adults. You are placed in a position of great responsibility to parent your child. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect because there is no perfect parents, right?
Yeah.
So remember being respectful and being kind to others around you, but also to yourself. Like,
Yeah.
you're going to make mistakes and you may say some things that's a bit too much, right? I would
Yeah.
say take your cues from your children. When your children ask you their questions, answer them. You don't need to do a 10-page answer about it. You don't need to go to the library and research what virus it is, right? Just say
Right.
this is what it is and this is what you need to do to keep everybody safe.
That's really good advice. Okay, so kids are getting back into school. What advice can you give families to help kids adjust to new schooling, no matter where they are?
Mm. I do expect, in September that there will be some struggles, just primarily because kids are going back to school after not being in school for 6 months. Right? And they're going back to school in a very different milieu, a different environment, right? And teachers are doing the best they can, but they're going back under a different milieu. This is not how they do teaching often, right? So again, there are
Yeah.
many variables in that environment that is going to create stress. So expect stress. Like, do not expect
Yeah.
this transition to be smooth, right?
Right.
If your child transitions smoothly and there are no issues, I say do the happy dance, thank God for it. That's great. But also expect that there might be some bumps along the way.
Yeah.
Be open, create an openness of discussion with your children, answer their questions, but also reassure them, right? Like, children take their cues from parents. So if they pick up the sense that you are highly anxious or you are distressed and you are worried, then they're going to pick it up, even though you're not maybe verbally telling them, right? They pick it up and they know that something's not quite right and that you're worried about them, right? So being
Yeah.
very cautious about your own emotional regulation when you talk to children and being careful what you say when they're around.
Right. I think that's great advice. And I know that maybe the fruit of the spirit, self control, comes into there, actually, all the fruit of the spirit. As you spend a lot of time with families, Jackie, in general, what have you found to be some of the most helpful family strategies that you've seen work in this time of COVID? That, and maybe in helping specifically to help people have greater success as we get into school. Is there any schooling advice or parent advice you can give us?
I would say definitely the adults need to be able to regulate their emotions and be aware that when they're emotionally dysregulated because they're distressed or they're upset or they're worried, which are all normal emotions that would come out of the situation we're in, that they seek out their support system, right? We have a nice, good community of friends or family, great. If they don't, or it's a little bit more distressing, then do seek professional help, right? And try to normalize life as much as you possibly can because there's nothing normal but what we're going through, right? So spending the time and doing activities and experiencing a lot of sensory rich activities so the children can learn. The other part, particularly when school was in session between April and June, was me telling parents to manage their expectations. Right?
Okay.
I was having a lot of distressed parents because they were struggling because they were having these certain expectations, which I don't know where it came from, that kids need to be functioning this way or doing this much work, managing your expectations, right? And that it's okay if it's not at perfect 10. Right? It's okay if your children, may struggle in school for a little bit or they may struggle academically right now, right? Again,
Right.
I had a lot of parents who says, I didn't ask to be a teacher, and now I have to be a teacher in my home. So
Right.
that, was a tough one,
Yeah.
so The families that did well were families that didn't have these certain expectations that we had to do so much work in the home for so many hours a day.
Right. I think that's great advice, Jackie. I mean, I taught for many years, as you know, and I don't think I'd want to sign up to do, the homeschooling as well. I'm just being real. And so I just want to say to parents out there, we want to encourage you. And, I know that as a parent, prayer made all the difference for me. That helped regulate my emotions when I would take things to God and help listen to what he said to me so that my emotions weren't controlling the whole environment. So, any last word for us, Jackie, before we let you go today?
I think we covered some of the basic points. Be kind and be gracious. And like God has it, He's competent. You know, whenever
Yeah,
I get a little bit stressed, I go, he's got it. Like he's it's in competent hands.
that's right. That's a good word. Thank you, Jackie, for being with us. We really appreciate it. And thanks a lot. Well, up next, there's a beautiful story where hope comes out of tragedy. Take a look.